have entered whispers of Asia, where shadows linger longer than the light, and the dead still speak through the breathless hush of incense smoke. Tonight you will hear a tale not told aloud since the temple gates first rotted shut, a tale born from the ashes of a fire that refused to burn, of a spirit that turned its back on the offering made in its name, and a village that discovered when the sacred is disturbed, it is not mercy that answers, but memory. Rooted in ancient Thai ritual, where the line between blessing and curse is as thin as a lotus petal, this is the story of a soul that would not pass on, and a ritual that never reached its end. This is the offering that the spirit refused, a Thai ritual gone wrong. Now light the candle, hush the world, and listen closely, for the spirits have already begun to gather. The morning fog had not yet lifted when the first signs of unease crept into the village of Ban Nong Prai. From the high peaks of the northern Thai hills, a veil of mist flowed down into the valley like a slow, silent procession of unseen monks. The trees bent as if bowing, heavy with dew. The cicadas had gone quiet. Even the roosters, those proud heralds of dawn, refused to sing. And above it all, the temple bell remained silent. Wat Tong Sai stood at the heart of the village, as it had for centuries. Its golden stupa pierced the gray sky like a sacred tooth. The old bell, cast in bronze and hung beneath a wooden awning, was meant to chime with the first light of day. 3 solemn strikes, calling the monks to prayer and the spirits to listen. But this morning, no sound came. Praniran, the youngest monk in the temple, sat on the edge of the wooden platform in his saffron robes, staring up at the bell with uneasy eyes. He had lit the incense. He had performed the morning chant. He had struck the bell pull gently, then firmly, then again, harder than he should have. But it did not ring. The air remained thick, still, as if the world were holding its breath. "Try again," came a soft voice behind him. It was Luang Pa Prom, the abbot, an old man whose eyes had seen more funerals than weddings, and more offerings than meals. He stood barefoot, his spine slightly hunched, his face carved with the wisdom and weight of years. Niran hesitated, then reached up and tugged the rope once more. Nothing. Only the creaking of wood and the faint rustle of leaves responded. "It's stuck?" Niran whispered. "No," the abbot said, eyes narrowing. "It is listening." Niran turned to him, confused. "The bell hears the world before it sings. When it chooses silence, something else is speaking." The funeral preparations had begun the night before. Som Chai, the most respected elder of Ban Nong Prai, had passed away in his sleep at the age of 92. His death was gentle, like a candle fluttering out in a room where the windows had all been shut. He was a farmer, a father, and once, long ago, a forest hunter. Everyone in the village knew his stories. They said he could still hear the old spirits that lived in the trees, that he never feared the forest at night, that his fields yielded rice even in the worst seasons. So when the old man passed, the village came together in reverence. His body was placed in the main hall of the temple, wrapped in a white shroud surrounded by lotus blossoms and candles. The family brought in fruit, garlands, folded robes for the monks, offerings to aid his soul's passage to the next life. It was to be a beautiful ceremony, full of chanting, memory, and ritual. But this morning, the bell refused to sound. Niran stood beside the abbot in the meditation hall, watching as the villagers trickled in. They brought candles and mats, palms pressed together in prayerful greeting. Everyone whispered. They all noticed the silence. Children tugged at their mother's sarongs, asking why the bell didn't ring. Elders stared up at it with narrowed eyes, as if trying to remember if such a thing had ever happened before. One old woman muttered a prayer beneath her breath and rubbed a tiger's tooth amulet she wore around her neck. "It's a sign," Maudwan said softly. She was Sormchai's widow, stooped, thin, dressed in black cotton. Her voice was neither trembling nor loud, but it carried weight. The abbot turned to her. "A sign of what?" She stared ahead at the coffin, unmoving. "That he's not ready to leave." The chanting began anyway. At mid-morning, the monks gathered in a line and began the Abhidhamma, sacred recitations for the dead. Their voices rose and fell in waves, echoing off the wood and stone. Smoke from the incense curled through the air in thin, searching fingers. Niran led the first verse, but his voice caught in his throat as he knelt beside the coffin. He could smell something beneath the incense, a faint sourness, not the scent of rot, but something bitter, unfamiliar. It lingered like old tea left too long in the pot. He looked down. At Sormchai's feet, wrapped in cloth, was the traditional offering tray, a lacquered wooden bowl filled with white rice, hard-boiled eggs, salt, and a folded robe. And next to it, the Puang Malai garland he had made himself the night before, jasmine, rose, and dokrak flowers strung tightly together. But the petals had turned brown. In the space of just a few hours, the garland had wilted completely. The white jasmine had become translucent and collapsed into itself. The roses drooped as if mourning. Ants crawled across the edges, forming a tight black spiral. Niran blinked. He had made that garland with his own hands, fresh and full of scent. It was meant to honor the dead. Why had it decayed so quickly? That night, the dogs began to howl. Not just one or two, but all of them. Stray dogs, house dogs, even the temple's own lazy mutt who normally didn't stir after sunset. They howled toward the forest, toward the sky, toward something the humans could not see. Maudwan stood on her porch and listened. She didn't cry. She didn't sleep. She simply sat there, rocking back and forth, whispering Somchai's name under her breath. The abbot sent Niran to bless the funeral pyre. The cremation would be the next day. Wood had been gathered, the pyre built behind the temple near the ancient Bodhi tree. Niran carried a bowl of lustral water and a candle for blessing. But as he approached the pyre, he saw that several logs had cracked down the center, not from the heat, but from within. Something had split them apart before they were lit. He poured the water and recited the prayers. Then he lit the candle and placed it near the base. The flame flickered, then went out. At dawn, the bell rang. Once. But no one had touched it. The villagers came running, looking up in fear. And there, above the platform, was the bell pull, swaying back and forth gently as if recently tugged. Only Niran stood at the base, watching it swing. His hands were folded in prayer. But his shadow was not.
The next morning brought no warmth with the sun. Though golden light filtered through the canopy of teak trees, it touched nothing. The temple courtyard remained pale and cold, the air unmoving, as if the world were suspended between breaths. The villagers gathered again, their voices hushed, their hands folded tight. The cremation was set to begin that afternoon. But first came the Kan Dak Mai, the floral offering ceremony. It was a simple yet sacred act. Before the body was taken to the pyre, the villagers would approach one by one and place folded paper flowers, incense sticks, and strands of jasmine beside Samchai's coffin. Gifts meant to accompany him to the next life. The offering table stood just beneath the altar steps. Niran had spent the early hours of dawn arranging it with care. He smoothed the silk cloth, polished the silver bowls, placed banana leaves in perfect overlapping circles, and set out the trays of symbolic food. Steamed sticky rice, salted fish, ripe bananas, a small dish of red curry, and a single boiled duck egg with a crack down its center. He didn't remember cracking it. Still, he said nothing. Perhaps the heat. Perhaps the spirits. He moved on to the flowers. Freshly picked from the temple garden, he strung together garlands of jasmine and orchids. His fingers worked quickly. Years of practice had made him precise. Each garland had to be looped with intention, tied with red string, and blessed before being laid beside the body. But as he tied the final loop, a strange stillness settled over the table. The breeze died, the birds stopped calling, and the petals in his hand began to curl. One by one, as if scorched by invisible heat, the edges of the jasmine flowers browned and shriveled. A soft hiss rose from the leaves as though something was breathing through them. Niran froze. He reached forward and touched one garland. The petals collapsed beneath his fingers, turning to gray pulp. A drop of water, no, not water, something thicker, rolled down his knuckle. It was black. He looked around. No one else had noticed yet. The villagers were busy setting mats, arranging candles, murmuring prayers. Even the abbot stood at a distance, deep in silent meditation beneath the Bodhi tree. Only Niran remained near the offering table, and only he saw what came next. A fly landed on the salted fish, then another, then 10, then a swarm. Within moments, the food was alive with movement, flies, ants, crawling things that had not been there seconds before. The rice darkened as if soaked from within. The banana split open, revealing soft, bruised flesh. The curry curdled in the bowl. The cracked egg shook once, then fell over, rolling slowly across the silk cloth until it dropped to the ground and split completely open. Inside, instead of yolk, was something black and moving. Niran backed away. His heart thudded in his chest, not from fear, but from something worse. Recognition. He had read of this. In the ancient temple texts, warnings really, there was mention of the Kan Pit Samret, the rejected tray, a funeral offering that the spirit refused to accept. When a soul had unfinished business, or when a ritual was broken, the offering would rot before being received. The insects would come first, then the smells, then the whispers.
And finally, the visitation. He hadn't believed those stories until now. The abbot came to his side. Niran did not speak. He simply pointed at the table. The abbot's eyes moved slowly across the ruined food, the swarming flies, the black liquid seeping down the leg of the table and into the soil. He said nothing. Then, carefully, he reached into his robe and removed a small bundle of white string, saicine, sacred cord used to protect and contain. He wrapped it once around the tray, then again, 9 loops in total. He tied a tight knot and whispered a prayer. When he opened his eyes, he looked tired, not afraid, but weary in the way only old monks get when something from the past returns to knock at the present. "This offering was not accepted," he said quietly. "Does that mean his spirit won't move on?" The abbot turned to him, voice low. "No, it means he's not the one watching." Medouane arrived at the temple late that morning. She walked barefoot through the courtyard, her black shawl clinging to her shoulders, her hands folded in Y. Though she was nearly 80 herself, her back remained straight and her eyes focused, sharp like a blade hidden in cloth. She approached the altar without hesitation. When she reached the offering table, she paused. She didn't blink. She simply looked and nodded. Then she leaned in close to Niran and whispered, "It's happening again." He stared at her, unsure what she meant. She didn't explain. She only placed something small on the table and walked away toward the coffin. Niran opened it when she was gone. Inside was a single bone, small, yellowed, with something scratched on its surface. A line of letters in an old script he didn't recognize. He took it to the abbot. The abbot touched it, inhaled, then set it down. "Did she keep this?" he murmured. "Do you know what it is?" The old monk nodded. "Yes, and if this bone has returned, then so has what it belonged to." The cremation was delayed. The villagers didn't ask why. Some said the firewood had gotten wet. Others believed it was auspicious to wait until the next moon phase. But the truth lingered like the scent of spoiled rice, unspoken, undeniable. The offerings had been rejected, and now something had entered the temple grounds that did not belong. That evening, Niran returned to the offering table. It had been cleared, but the silk cloth remained stained, the silver bowls tarnished, and the earth beneath the table darkened into mud. He stood there for a long time, hands behind his back, heart still. Then he heard it, the soft scrape of footsteps on stone. He turned. No one. Only incense smoke curling in the windless air. Then a whisper. Not a voice, just breath, hot and close. He spun again. Still no one. But when he looked down, a single jasmine flower lay at his feet, fresh, untouched, the same kind he had strung the day before. He bent to pick it up, and as his fingers touched the petal, it wilted in his hand. The rain came without clouds. A fine mist fell over Bon Nong Prai like breath on glass, barely visible yet soaking everything. It clung to rooftops, drifted down the temple walls, and wrapped the Bodhi tree in a damp shroud. The villagers stayed inside, shutters closed, as if the world outside had turned sour and heavy. Inside the temple, the air was thicker than smoke.
The coffin of Somchai remained untouched, his body preserved by sacred herbs and chants. But something had changed. The incense no longer curled upward, it scattered sideways. The candles flickered as if afraid of their own flames. And the silence was no longer peaceful. It was watching. Mei Duan waited until evening to approach the abbot. She came barefoot, as always, her black shawl draped around her head like mourning silk. Her steps were slow, but not uncertain. She had been walking these temple stones for most of her life, and tonight her feet knew exactly where they were going. The abbot waited in the sermon hall. He sat cross-legged on a reed mat, eyes closed, hands resting gently in his lap. The candle before him burned low, casting a trembling golden pool across the floor. Mei Duan entered and knelt across from him. Neither spoke at first. Only the soft crackling of the wick and the rain's breath against the temple's eaves. Then the abbot opened his eyes. "You brought the bone," she nodded. "And you knew he would refuse the offering." Another nod. He sighed. "How long?" Mei Duan lowered her gaze. 37 years. The candle sputtered slightly, as if it too flinched at the number. "He was not always a peaceful man," Mei Duan began, her voice steady and low. "You see him now laid in white silk, with flowers at his feet. But Somchai, he made his peace with this world late. Too late." She paused. The abbot waited. "He was a hunter once, not just of boar or deer, but of things deeper, things older." "In the forest?" "Yes," she nodded. "In the old part, the part the monks said to avoid, where the roots twist the wrong way and the air tastes like stone." The abbot said nothing. Mei Duan continued. "She found an altar there, buried beneath a mound of earth, half swallowed by a banyan tree, carved with symbols even the elders didn't know." She looked up, eyes gleaming beneath her wrinkled brow. "She took something." The candle guttered again. "She brought it home in a pouch, told me not to look, but I heard it at night, something knocking from inside, like a tooth against wood." The abbot's mouth pressed into a line. "The bone." "Yes, it was a part of a monk," he said, "a fragment from someone who died during meditation but never let go. He said it had power." "What kind of power?" Mei Duan's eyes hardened. "Longevity, protection, luck." "And the price?" She hesitated. Then her voice dropped to barely a breath. "He had to make a vow, to feed it, to keep its name hidden, to never let it be buried. And when he died, he had to be the one to carry it into the next life." The abbot exhaled slowly, as if trying to breathe out decades of dust. "But the family demanded a proper cremation. They insisted on offerings, on blessings, on release." "Yes, because they didn't know. He never told anyone, not even his sons." "You should have." "I wanted to," she snapped. "But how do you explain that your husband made a pact with a ghost who demands to be carried like a child?" She shook her head. "Besides, I thought it would end with him." The silence between them thickened. Then the abbot asked, "Why return the bone now?" Mei Duan's voice cracked. "Because the spirit is angry. It waited its turn, and when the offering tray was placed, it saw the rice was not for it. The candles were not for it. The name spoken aloud was not its own." Her fingers trembled as she pulled the shawl tighter. "It does not want to pass on. It wants what it was promised. It wants him. That night, the temple doors would not close. No matter how hard they pushed, the heavy teak doors swang gently open again and again, as if breathing. The monks tied ropes across them, laid bricks at their base, but by dawn they were open once more, inviting something inside, something that did not knock. Niran awoke from a dream he could not remember. Only the scent of damp ash lingered. He stepped outside his quarters into the courtyard and saw the trail, black footprints across the stone, still wet, leading from the coffin to the base of the offering table. There, in the soil, a single word had been etched: pit. Wrong. The abbot came beside him, clutching his prayer beads. His face was pale. He was warned. By whom? The abbot shook his head. By the thing he carried. Maidwan didn't come to the temple that morning. When Niran went to her home, he found her sitting on the floor before a bowl of rice that had turned blue. She was humming softly to something that was no longer there. By the time the spirit medium arrived, the air inside the temple was already heavy. Not with heat. Bun Nong Thrai was cool that morning, cloaked in a thin drizzle, but with something that pressed against the chest, something that made breath shallow, voices hushed, and eyes unwilling to wander toward shadows. The coffin had not been moved. The offerings had not been touched. And still, no one dared ask the question aloud, why hasn't the cremation begun? Her name was Bua Kam. She came from 3 villages over, wearing a white robe stained with candle wax and turmeric dust. Her hair was long, tied back with red string, and her arms were covered in faint ritual scars, marks of trance. The abbot greeted her at the gate. "You still do this?" he asked quietly. She smiled without showing teeth. "I came. When the spirits call, I listen." The villagers gathered in a wide circle around the chanting hall. Inside, the air was dim. Incense burned in thick waves. A bowl of flower water sat in the center, floating with crushed petals and ash. The coffin of some chai loomed behind it, draped in silk and marigolds. Before the bowl, Bua Kam knelt, her head bowed, her hands in prayer. And then the silence deepened. Even the insects in the rafters ceased their song. She began to rock gently at first. Her shoulders swayed, her breath changed rhythm. A low hum emerged from her throat, rising in cadence with the roll of the drum outside the hall. Then her eyes snapped open, glazed white. A sharp inhale, like breath pulled too fast into a drowning chest. Her spine arched backward, her limbs trembled, and she screamed. Not a scream of pain, but of refusal. A voice, not hers, rose from her mouth. Rough, male, wet with bitterness. "You feed me rice meant for strangers. You light candles in names I do not know. You call for the wrong soul." The villagers gasped. Children hid their faces in their mothers' skirts. The abbot stepped forward, eyes steady. "Who are you?" he asked. The voice inside Bua Kam did not answer. Instead, her arms shot out, knocking the flower bowl across the floor. Petals scattered like teeth. Ash formed symbols no one dared to read. Then the voice whispered, He promised I would be carried." And with that, she collapsed. It took 3 monks to lift her. She was cold to the touch. Her lips were stained with something dark, not blood. Her pulse was faint.
The abbot pressed a wet cloth to her forehead and whispered old prayers, prayers meant to bring back those who had wandered too far from themselves. When Buakam finally stirred, her voice was hoarse. It wasn't Somchai. It wasn't his spirit that came. Then who? She looked past him, not at anything, but at the space behind. The one he carried. Outside, the offerings had begun to blacken. The rice curled in on itself like dried paper. The incense bent mid-air, forming sharp angles. The garlands rotted from the center out, turning the petals translucent and slimy. Flies returned, but only to the offering tray. They avoided the coffin entirely, as if the body inside no longer interested them. The villagers refused to return to the temple that night. Even the most devout elders, who never missed a full moon chant, stayed home and locked their doors with extra loops of red thread. Dogs whimpered beneath houses, chickens huddled in corners, eyes wide and unblinking. Only Niran remained. He walked barefoot around the temple grounds holding a candle. His chant was steady but quiet, a rhythm not meant to ward off, but to calm. When he reached the altar, he stopped. The offering tray had been moved, just slightly, not by wind, not by animal, but by something that had fingers. He knelt, lit another stick of incense, placed it upright, and whispered, "If you are not Somchai, then what are you waiting for?" There was no answer, but the flame bent toward him, as if listening. Later that night, the abbot summoned Niran to the sermon hall. They sat together in silence, the candle between them flickering erratically. "I need you to prepare for Piti Pongsap," the abbot said at last. "The transference of merit?" Niran's heart quickened. The abbot nodded. "It must be done, whether the spirit is his or something else. We must offer light, guidance." Niran hesitated. What if it doesn't want guidance? The abbot looked at him, softly, but without comfort. "Then it will reveal itself." The ritual began just before midnight. The monks sat in a circle, each holding a lit candle, chanting in low, rhythmic cadence. At the center, a silver bowl filled with sacred water and lotus petals shimmered with reflected firelight. The abbot led the chant, voice deep and resonant. Niran sat opposite him, focused. The transference of merit was a gift of spiritual credit passed from the living to the dead, easing their journey into the next life. The water trembled. The candles danced. Then the wind came. From inside the temple. It rushed through the circle, not cold, but stifling, heavy with rot, bitter with old iron. The candles flickered wildly, and the bowl cracked. A hairline fracture split it clean down the middle. The water inside turned murky. The petals dissolved into gray pulp. Then the incense went out. All of it. Snuffed at once. A silence fell that was not peaceful. It was thick, pulsing. And then, "You cannot buy my silence with prayers." The voice didn't come from Buakam this time. It came from everywhere. Above, below, inside. A presence that did not belong to any one corner. The abbot clutched his beads. Niran felt the marrow in his bones grow cold. And then the candles burst back to life. All at once, but now the flames were blue, flickering without sound, without smoke. The monks stared, and the coffin creaked. Once, Then again. Then silence. The spirit had spoken. It would not accept.
By the 5th day, the temple no longer felt sacred. It had grown uncertain, as if the chants no longer echoed but sank, as if the prayer flags no longer fluttered but hung like limbs too tired to lift. The stone floor, once warm underfoot, now carried a chill that never left. Even the dogs had stopped entering the courtyard. It was the candles that changed first. They began to drip upward. Naran noticed it at dusk. He was sweeping the inner sanctum when he paused beside the row of ceremonial candles lining the windowsill. Their flames wavered normally, flickering in the breeze, but the wax slid in the wrong direction. Up. Tiny beads of liquid rose from the base of the candle, climbing against gravity, curling like roots in reverse, collecting beneath the flame itself, and hardening there like yellow-white thorns. He blinked, stepped closer, and reached out with his fingertip. Hot. Too hot. The wax hissed against his skin, not with a burn, but with something deeper. It made his teeth ache, his pulse quicken. He drew his hand back and stared at the candle. The flame pulsed once and leaned toward him, as if it could see. That night, Fra Joran, the eldest monk aside from the abbot, was found shivering in the cloister hallway. His robe was soaked through with melted wax, clinging to his chest in strange patterns. He had no memory of how it happened, only that he had been walking back from meditation, and the candles in the main hall had begun to chant. Not flicker, not crackle. Chant. He described the sound as wet syllables whispered through teeth, like the voice of someone trying to breathe and speak at the same time. It had echoed off the temple pillars and poured into his ears, and then nothing. When the abbot examined the patterns on his robe, he went quiet. The wax had formed 7 symbols, not Thai, older. The next morning, Naran prepared the temple for the delayed cremation, now rescheduled for the 3rd time. But when he entered the hall, he found the candles placed around Somchai's portrait had all burned backward. Their wicks had turned black and curled into themselves. Their wax had not dripped, but climbed, forming thin finger-like coils that reached upward along the portrait's edge, stopping just beneath the eyes, and the portrait itself had changed, subtly. Somchai's painted gaze, once gentle, now seemed sharp, less peaceful, more alert, watching. The abbot called a private meeting that afternoon. Only 3 monks were present, himself, Naran, and Fra Dam, the scribe. They sat on floor cushions before the altar, incense lit, hands folded. "What we are dealing with," the abbot said slowly, "is not merely a rejected offering." He nodded toward the offering table, now stripped bare, its cloth removed, its bowls stored away. "This is possession," Naran's breath caught. "Of the body?" The abbot shook his head. "Of the ceremony." Fra Dam frowned. "What do you mean?" The abbot looked to the Bodhi tree beyond the open window, its leaves swaying though no wind stirred. He said, "There are spirits that do not want release, spirits who were never offered the rites, who were left unburned, unnamed, unfed." He turned to Naran. "When we lit those candles,
They saw an invitation. That night, Naran chose to stay awake. He lit a single candle in his room, placed a mirror before it, and sat cross-legged in meditation. He whispered the protection chant slowly, letting it wrap around him like a robe of breath. The candle burned steady. The flame was golden. Then, midway through his third repetition, the wax began to rise. Again, upward, like it was being pulled by invisible hands. Naran kept chanting. But then, the mirror fogged over. Not from heat, but from breath. There was no breeze, no one else. But the mirror pulsed softly with condensation, two faint spots forming side by side, as if something stood just beyond the glass watching, breathing. He reached out and wiped the mirror clean. Nothing. No reflection. Only the candle. And then, for a single second, the flame turned black. It didn't extinguish. It inverted. The light disappeared, swallowed into itself. And in that flicker, Naran heard a sound he would never forget. A voice, whispering in the space behind his heartbeat. I was promised light. At dawn, the temple bell rang once. Just once. No one had touched it. And beneath the bell rope, on the stone floor, was a pool of wax shaped like a human hand, still warm, still soft. It hadn't dripped from above. It had risen from below. The villagers had stopped visiting the temple by then. They murmured of ill omens, of offerings that rotted too quickly, of dreams where their ancestors turned their backs. One woman said she saw Somchai walking the road toward the rice fields, only he had no shadow. Another claimed her baby cried whenever the temple was mentioned. Even the chickens laid their eggs backward, small ends first. And in the sky above Bonnong Prai, the moon had not been seen in 2 nights. The abbot remained silent for the rest of the day. He meditated beneath the Bodhi tree for hours, unmoving. When Naran approached him at dusk, the old monk opened his eyes slowly. They always speak through flame, he murmured. The old ones, the ones that were never named. Fire remembers them. Naran knelt beside him. Then what do we do? The abbot looked at the temple roof. We stop offering what they don't want. Naran swallowed. And give them what they do? The abbot didn't answer. But his silence was not confusion. It was grief. That night, the candles in the prayer hall all burned black, and none of them melted. They burned and never grew smaller. Time had stopped, and the flames had begun to whisper again. It began with the leaves. They curled, not from wind or weather, but from within. Their green surface blistered into red veins, as if blood had risen through the tree's capillaries. The Bodhi tree, which stood behind the cremation pyre, had always been revered. It was the heart of the temple grounds, the oldest living thing in Bonnong Prai. Now it was changing, and the monks could feel it. Even before the sap began to run, Pradam was the first to see it. He had risen early to perform the water blessing around the pyre, pouring lustral water into the soil. When he circled behind the tree, he froze. A gash had opened along the trunk, not carved, not cracked, but split. And from that wound, a thick, dark liquid seeped, slow and heavy. It dripped in long strands down the bark and pooled at the roots. But it was not sap. It was red, too thick, blood. He called for the abbot. The old man knelt before the tree, dipped his finger into the liquid, and sniffed. Iron. Then he touched it to his tongue. He said nothing, but the tightness in his jaw spoke volumes. Niran arrived moments later, his breath sharp with unease. The abbot rose. This is not from the tree. Niran glanced at the wound. Then where? The abbot looked down at the roots. It was poured in from underneath. That afternoon, word spread fast. Villagers gathered beyond the temple fence, eyes wide, mouths covered in murmured prayers. Someone claimed the blood trail began days earlier, but had only now reached the surface. Another whispered that the Bodhi tree had grown from a monk's grave, and this was his revenge for being forgotten. But Mai Duan said nothing. She only stared at the bleeding trunk, with a face carved from stone, as if she had been waiting for it. That night the wind changed, not direction, but tone. It no longer rustled the leaves, it whistled through them, a high, fluted sound, like breath through bone. It crept through the corridors, hummed along the eaves, and circled the prayer hall. The monks could not sleep. Their dreams were broken, fragmented scenes of fire that burned without light, of faces with no mouths, of staircases that led down and never ended, and always the tree, reaching, dripping, watching. The abbot ordered the sacred boundary reinforced. Lines of Sai Sin, white cord blessed by monks, were tied around the tree, the pyre, and the hall. Niran sprinkled holy water along the fence and hung lotus garlands above each doorway. Prayers were recited. Chants echoed through the halls. Still, the bleeding continued, and now the roots began to move. They shifted beneath the soil like slow, unseen serpents. The earth cracked in places. Ants poured from holes in the ground, and in the space beneath the altar, the floor began to grow warm. Niran pressed his hand to the wood. It pulsed, once, like something sleeping underneath. On the 6th night, a woodcutter named Tan came to the temple. He was drunk, loud, angry. He shouted at the monks, demanding to know why the cremation hadn't happened yet, why the offerings stank, why his daughter had started speaking to empty corners of the room. No one answered him, so he picked up an axe and swung it at the tree. The blade struck once, then again, and on the 3rd swing, the tree screamed, not in wood, in voice, a high, shrill human cry, piercing the silence like a knife through silk. Tan dropped the axe. It had bent. The blade, solid iron, had curled like paper. His hands blistered instantly. Red boils rose across his palms. He stumbled back, his face pale. Then his eyes turned black. They rushed him to the sermon hall, but he did not speak. He sat cross-legged on the floor, rocking back and forth, mumbling a single phrase. It opened its eyes, it opened its eyes, it opened its eyes. He wouldn't say what it was, but he refused to look toward the tree, even when they covered it with cloth. At dawn, Niran entered the Bodhi circle alone. He bowed to the tree, lit incense, and knelt before the roots. He didn't chant, he only whispered, "If you are not the one meant to be burned, then what do you want from us?" The wind rustled the cloth draped over the tree. The incense trembled, and a single leaf fell. It landed beside him, black, charred, as if it had fallen not from a branch, but from a fire. Later, when Niran examined the roots again, he noticed something. Symbols carved into the bark, too deep, too old. Not Thai, older. The abbot confirmed it with a trembling voice. "These aren't blessings," he whispered. "They're bindings." Niran looked at him. "Then the tree was planted to contain something?" The abbot nodded. "And now the container is bleeding." The cremation was delayed again. No one asked why. Everyone already knew. The spirit had refused to pass, and now the land itself had begun to remember what was buried beneath it. On the seventh day, the temple drum began to beat on its own. It was just before dawn, when darkness is softest, when the world is neither asleep nor awake, but somewhere between remembering and forgetting. Mist blanketed the rice fields. The clouds above hung low and colorless. The birds had not yet called. And from the temple's eastern wing, the sound rose like thunder held in a wooden chest. Boom, boom, boom. Not fast, not loud, but steady. A heartbeat that did not belong. The drum was ancient. Carved from jackfruit wood and stretched with buffalo hide, it hung in a covered shrine just beyond the prayer hall. It was only used for two purposes: to call the spirits during funeral rites and to summon the village in times of sacred warning. It had not been touched in years. When the monks arrived, the drumsticks were still in their resting hooks. No footprints, no wind, no explanation. But the hide still trembled, and the sound continued. Boom, 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 like someone knocking from the inside. Pradam recited a blessing over the drum. The abbot sprinkled holy water across the shrine. Niran whispered the funeral invocation 3 times. Still, the drum did not stop. It beat throughout the morning, slow, rhythmic, deep enough to make teeth ache and dreams tremble. The villagers heard it from their homes and closed their doors. The elders lit candles and sat in silence. Even May Duan wept, not loudly, just one tear, as if she finally knew the debt had come due. By noon, the sky dimmed to gray. The jungle beyond the village grew silent. Even the insects refused to sing. That's when the names began. They came softly at first, faint whispers riding the rhythm of the drum. No one heard them clearly, just syllables that coiled through the wind, curling beneath the eaves of the sermon hall and slipping under doors. It wasn't Somchai's name. It was someone else. A name no one had spoken in years. Chin. Novice Chin. Chin. Come back, Chin. Niran froze. He knew that name. A whisper from temple archives, a story no one liked to tell. He searched the old record books that evening, dusty scrolls and crumbling ledgers that lined the temple's oldest shelves. He traced his fingers down brittle paper until he found it. Novice Chin. Ordained at age 15. Died at 16. Cause of death unknown. Body not cremated. Record sealed by prior abbot. No photo, no chant listed, just a line beneath the entry. Do not summon.
Naran brought the scroll to the abbot. The old monk read it, lips tightening with each word. He placed the scroll down gently, as if it might scream. "He died during meditation," the abbot said softly. "In this temple?" The abbot nodded. "Here, on a night like this. No wind, no moon." Naran swallowed. "Why wasn't he cremated?" The abbot looked toward the east wing, where the drums still whispered. "Because his spirit refused to leave." The story came out in fragments. Chin was quiet, bright, eager to serve, but strange things followed him. Candles that would not light, statues that turned their gaze. He spoke to shadows. He chanted in his sleep. One night the monks found him sitting cross-legged in the prayer hall, eyes open, mouth stitched shut with red thread. He was dead, but he looked awake. They burned the thread, washed the body, but when they tried to carry him to the pyre, the fire went out 3 times, so they placed him in a sealed room and planted a Bodhi tree above it. That same tree now bled, and the drum, his drum, now called. The abbot stared into the flame between them. It wasn't Samchai the spirit wanted. It was Chin. Naran whispered, "But Samchai promised to carry him." The abbot closed his eyes and broke that promise. At dusk, the drumbeats stopped. Just like that. No fading, no slowing, just silence. A silence that pressed into the chest. And then 3 loud knocks. Boom, boom, boom. And the sound of footsteps on old wood. Naran rushed outside. The air was heavy. The light had gone dim, though the sun hadn't set. And at the edge of the Bodhi tree's circle stood a boy, thin, shaved head, wearing an old novice's robe. His back was turned, still, unmoving. Naran stepped forward. "Chin?" The boy tilted his head. Slowly. Too slowly. And then he vanished, like smoke in a closed room. That night the monks did not sleep. They chanted in shifts, candles lit in every hallway, but the light did not reach the shadows. The air tasted of rust, and every so often, from the east wing, the drum whispered again. Not a beat, not a knock, just the sound of fingers brushing the skin from underneath.
It started with his shadow. At first, Naran didn't notice. He was too busy tending the incense pots, sweeping the sermon hall, replacing the cracked water bowls near the altar. He moved from ritual to ritual like a man walking through fog, dutiful, silent, steady. But by the 3rd evening, something felt wrong. His shadow was not following him. It was waiting. He first saw it while crossing the inner courtyard. The moon had just risen, casting a pale glow through the clouds. He walked past the well, his robe whispering against stone. His steps were soft, measured. But the shadow beneath him didn't match his pace. It moved slower, then paused, as if it were thinking. He stopped. The shadow did not. It took one more step, then froze. He backed away slowly, breathing tight. It couldn't be. It must have been a trick of the light. The temple's angles, the torchlight behind the gate, the curvature of the stone tiles. But deep down, Naran already knew. He had felt it for days now, in his sleep, in his breath, in the cold spot beneath his ribs. Something was inside his silence. That night, he placed a ritual mirror beneath his sleeping mat, a tradition old monks whispered about, a way to see what followed you into dreams. He recited the protection chant 12 times, lit sandalwood incense, tied a length of sai-sin cord around his wrist. Then he lay down and waited. Sleep came unevenly. He drifted in and out of dreamscapes, a hallway with no doors, an altar covered in ash, a child laughing behind a wall. But always, at the edge of the dream, there was movement. Not sound, not speech, just a shape. And when he awoke at dawn, he found the mirror cracked clean down the center. There, in the reflection, his own face stared back, but the shadow behind him wasn't his. It smiled. Naran didn't tell the abbot, not yet. Instead, he went to the Bodhi tree, knelt before the bloodied roots, and whispered, "What do you want from me?" The wind responded, not in words, but in rhythm. A rustle, a pause, a second rustle, then silence. It mimicked breath, and beneath the soil, the roots shifted slightly, as if adjusting for a better view. By afternoon, the signs grew stronger. When Naran passed beneath the temple arch, the birds above scattered in fear. When he stepped inside the chanting hall, the candles dimmed, not from wind, but from awareness. When he looked into the brass water bowl, the reflection showed him kneeling, but behind him, another robed figure stood, unmoving. He turned quickly. No one there. The water rippled. The shape remained, still smiling. The abbot noticed his silence. They sat beneath the prayer flags in the late evening, the air damp and fragrant with crushed lemongrass. "You're carrying something," the abbot said gently. Naran didn't answer. Not a burden, not guilt, something older. Naran looked down at his hands. "I feel my shadow clinging," he whispered. The abbot's eyes narrowed. They performed a ritual cleansing that night, not for the body, but for the spirit. The abbot mixed turmeric, lime, and sacred ash into a paste and spread it in lines across Naran's back. He placed a folded leaf beneath his tongue, chanted until the stars shifted. Then he lit a single candle and watched the wall behind them. The shadow that appeared was not Naran's. It moved with him, but delayed. It blinked when he didn't, and when the flame flickered, it grinned. The abbot paled. "This is no longer just possession," he said quietly. "This is merging." Pradam found an old record the next morning, tucked deep in the archives beneath the sermon hall. A scroll wrapped in black silk, sealed with wax. He opened it. Inside, ritual instructions. To sever a bound shadow. It required 3 things: a mirror that had reflected the host 3 nights in a row, an offering of bone from the source spirit, and a name not given but stolen. Only one of the 3 was missing: the name. Niran returned to Mei Duan. She was sitting on her porch, surrounded by wilted flowers, staring into the distance. "I need his real name," he said. She didn't blink. "I gave it away," she replied softly. "To whom?" "To the thing he promised to carry." That night, Niran didn't sleep. He walked the temple grounds with bare feet and a lit candle. Everywhere he turned, his shadow followed, half a step behind, half a second too slow. Its hands were longer now, its head slightly tilted, and when he stood still, it breathed. He went to the east wing, where the drum had stopped. He placed his mirror on the floor and waited. The air grew cold, the shadows grew thick, and when the candle flickered low, he saw it. Not behind him, but rising up from beneath, a second shadow, thin, young, head shaved, hands pressed together in mock prayer, and a voice, "You called." It began with silence, not in the temple, in the village, where for generations dreams were as common as roosters crowing and children laughing in the fields, dreams of ancestors offering advice, dreams of rivers that led to treasure, dreams of warnings, dreams of blessings. Now, there was nothing, just a dark wall in the mind. On the 9th morning, the market square was unusually quiet. Vendors sat behind their stalls but did not call out. Fruits remained unsold. Fish swam in still water, untouched. No one made eye contact, because no one had slept well. And when asked what they had dreamed, every villager gave the same answer: "I didn't." It wasn't just forgetfulness. It was absence, a blank space, the kind of emptiness that hums when something important has been stolen. Children, normally bright-eyed and playful, sat quietly with their toys untouched. An old woman who used to wake up laughing from dreams of her husband now stared at the wall of her hut, fingers trembling. Even the village dogs whined in their sleep, not because they were afraid, but because they were aware of the nothing. Mai Duan, pale and gaunt, walked through the market, whispering, "He's eating the dreams now, just like he did before." No one asked what she meant. They already knew. Something had been disturbed, and now something that used to stay quiet between worlds was hungry. At the temple, Niran stood before the prayer hall. His shadow was gone. No longer behind him, no longer beneath him. It had detached fully. He didn't know when it happened, only that he now felt light, unanchored, and watched, constantly. The abbot studied the village map that afternoon, an old cloth parchment showing the houses, the river, the spirit trees. He circled 5 homes. "Every child in these houses sleepwalked last night," he told Niran. Niran frowned. "To where?" He pointed toward the west edge of the village. They were found standing at the edge of the water, barefoot, eyes open, repeating the same words. He paused, then said it aloud. "The spirit is still hungry." That evening, they gathered a small group of monks and walked to the river. The sun was beginning to set, bleeding soft orange light through the trees. Dragonflies skimmed the water, The jungle beyond was silent, but something was wrong with the river. It had slowed, almost unnaturally, as if time itself had thickened within its current. And there, on the shore, were 5 small footprints, deep, wet, as if pressed by something heavier than a child. In the middle of the prints, a single line of red string. Naran picked it up. It was knotted, not randomly, deliberately. Each knot a prayer, each twist an intention. He recognized the pattern. It was the same design used in forbidden Sai-Sin binding rituals, meant to anchor a spirit to a body, or a body to something that should have been let go. They brought the string back to the temple. The abbot burned it over a sacred bowl. The smoke rose quickly, then stopped, mid-air, hung there like frozen breath, and didn't move. It formed a shape, thin, long-limbed, head bowed, then collapsed into ash. The monks said nothing, but Naran heard them chanting later that night, not aloud, in their sleep, low voices echoing down the halls, the same 3 words again and again. Don't wake him. The next day, not a single villager reported a dream. They were afraid to sleep. Some drank coffee to stay awake. Others chewed betel nut until their gums bled. But the more they stayed awake, the more exhausted they became. And exhaustion is a doorway. It doesn't care whether you're awake or asleep. It lets things in. That afternoon, a young girl named Molly was found sitting at the edge of the jungle, alone, dressed in her school uniform, singing a lullaby. But the tune was off-key, slowed, like it was being played backward. Naran approached her gently. She looked up and smiled. He's done pretending. Now he wants to be seen. She handed him something, a candle wick, twisted, burned, but it hadn't melted. It had grown, lengthened into a braid of hair and wax and string, something meant to burn, but chose not to. That night, Naran returned to the Bodhi tree. Its roots were still, but the earth around it had cracked wider, like something beneath was stretching, trying to stand. He sat before it and said quietly, "The village has stopped dreaming." No reply. Then, from behind him, a whisper, a voice he knew, his own, "Because I've started." He turned. There was nothing there, only his reflection in the brass water bowl. But this time, his eyes in the reflection blinked after he did. It was May Duan who led them there. At first, no one understood what she meant when she said he never buried it deep enough. She sat beneath her house on stilts, her eyes cloudy but sharp, her voice steady despite the tremor in her fingers. When the abbot asked her again what Samchai had done, she only repeated the phrase, "He thought if the floor remembered, the spirit would forget." She rose slowly, unwrapped the red sash from her waist, and pointed toward the back of her house. "To the place where the rice never grew," she whispered, "where the dogs never went. Under the room he never let me sweep." The floorboards groaned as Niran stepped across them. The old planks creaked, not from his weight, but as if disturbed by memory. The room at the back of Somchai's house had always been locked. A prayer mat, an old fan, and a single window. Nothing else, except for the unevenness of the floor. Niram dropped to his knees and listened. Tap, tap, tap. Hollow. They pried up the board slowly. The air that escaped was not dust-filled. It was damp, sweet, fungal, like breath trapped in a jar. Beneath the floor there was a space, not deep, just enough to hide something. The abbot lit a candle and peered into the gap. His breath caught. Below, half buried in packed soil, was an altar. Not Buddhist, not local. It was carved from bone, blackened, ribbed, painted with what looked like dried blood and gold leaf. At its center was a bowl filled with teeth, milk teeth, small and yellow, set in concentric rings around a cracked stone. Wrapped around the base was red string, the same string that had appeared by the river, the same knots, same pattern, the same curse. Pra-Dam stepped back in horror. "This isn't an altar, it's a vessel." The abbot nodded slowly. "Some chai fed it." "Fed it what?" Niran asked. The abbot's voice dropped. "Names." There were markings around the bone, etched letters in an ancient Lana script. The abbot read them aloud softly. "He who is not burned waits beneath the bowl. He who was never named drinks from stolen sleep. When the offering is made wrong, he wakes." Silence followed. Then Meiduan spoke from behind them. "He built it after Chin died." She knelt beside the gap. "I told him it was wrong, that the boy should have been cremated, but he said the spirit spoke to him, that Chin promised him time, more years, more harvest, fewer sicknesses. And for a while it worked. After Chin's death, Somchai had prospered. His fields flourished when others withered. His children never fell ill. Even the village believed he was blessed. But beneath the house he lit candles to something ancient and whispered names into the bowl." The abbot closed his eyes. "This is why the offerings were rejected. They were never meant for Somchai. They were meant for the one he carried. The spirit of Chin had not been appeased, it had been contained, bound to an altar of secret rituals and red string. And now the altar had been uncovered, the seal broken, the hunger released. They burned the altar that evening, but the fire did not catch. 3 times they lit it. 3 times it hissed. The red string would not burn. The teeth clattered inside the bowl, though no one touched them, and the cracked stone at the center, it began to bleed. They buried the altar entirely instead, beneath the temple grounds, sealing it in salt and ash. But the next morning, the altar was back beneath the house, untouched, not a speck of dirt on it, waiting. The abbot made his decision. It was time for a fire ritual, but not for Somchai, for the altar, for Chin, for whatever still sat between the offering and the smoke. That night, Niran sat alone in the chanting hall. He placed a new offering tray before him, this time not filled with rice, but with 7 black candles and a broken mirror. No flower garlands, no fruit, no robe, just silence. He waited. Midnight passed. The wind howled, and then a child's voice behind him. "You found it, but you didn't ask who built it first." He turned slowly. Nothing. Only the shadow cast by the Bodhi tree through the open window. But it moved. It crept across the wall, thin and crooked, the shape of a boy who never grew up. Niran whispered, "What do you want?" The shadow tilted its head, and answered without sound everything that was promised. Then it vanished, and the mirror cracked in half.
The 11th day was meant for water. In Thai tradition, when fire fails, water is summoned, not as a punishment, but as a plea. Water blesses, cools, washes away what fire cannot consume. So the monks prepared the Kanmak Nam, the ceremonial blessing with sacred water poured from a clay bowl. It was one of the oldest rites, older than the temple itself, one that had not been performed in Ban Nong Prai in 2 generations, until now. The morning sun was pale. Thin clouds drifted low, brushing the tops of banana trees like gauze. The villagers gathered hesitantly at the temple gates. Some came barefoot, holding jasmine garlands. Others came only to watch, their eyes haunted from sleepless nights. Children were kept home. Dogs refused to enter the courtyard. Only the old and the brave stood close enough to see. And Niran was the one chosen to pour the water. The clay bowl was centuries old, passed from abbot to abbot, hand-thrown, unpainted, smooth like river stone. It was said to hold the memory of every spirit it had ever touched. Inside it, water drawn from 3 sources, the village well, the monastery spring, and a bowl left out to catch rain at the foot of the Bodhi tree. Salt was added, petals of white lotus, and 7 grains of uncooked rice, each blessed with a chant. It was enough to reach the other side, or so they hoped. Niran held the bowl with both hands as he approached the coffin. It no longer smelled of decay, but of damp earth, of things buried and impatient. The air trembled slightly as he stepped forward. The abbot chanted behind him. Other monks circled with incense. Ma Duan stood at the edge, her hands clutched tightly over her chest. No one breathed. Niran knelt beside the coffin, lowered the bowl, and tilted it gently. The first few drops of water spilled on the white sheet covering Somchai's feet, and the bowl cracked. It didn't explode, it split, silently, a single line, straight down the center. The water inside stilled instantly, then darkened. It wasn't dye or dirt. The clear water turned the color of charcoal ink and then moved. Ripples formed, but not outward, inward, as if something beneath the surface was pulling everything down. Petals sank, rice vanished, the bowl trembled, and a single voice whispered from its depths, "Wrong bowl, wrong name, wrong fire." Then the crack widened, and the bowl shattered in Niran's hands. The sacred water soaked his robe. It was cold, so cold he couldn't breathe for a moment. His fingers burned, not from heat, but from ice. He dropped the shards. They clattered against the stone, forming a near-perfect circle. Then nothing. The abbot rushed to him, placed a hand on his shoulder. Niran looked up. "I saw his face," he whispered. "Not Somchai." The abbot nodded slowly. "Chin." That night, the water in every home turned cloudy. Wells refused to draw. Pots filled with clean rain grew slimy. Even the river slowed again, its surface covered in a thin, oily sheen that shimmered red beneath the moonlight. People bathed with damp cloths. Some began to burn herbs in place of soap. A few whispered that the village was being washed in reverse, that blessings had turned back toward the dead.
Inside the temple, a monk began vomiting during evening chant. Not food, not blood, stones, small river pebbles, wet, cold. When he stopped, his mouth was stained black, and his voice had changed. Higher, childlike. It said, "He never meant to carry me. He just wanted to live longer." The abbot called for a severing ritual that night, but the red string they'd gathered had begun to knot itself. They tried to cut it. It frayed, bled, dripped wax that hadn't been melted. The altar, reburied twice, returned again, now inside the sermon hall. Its bowl was full, but not with teeth, with names, folded slips of paper, each name written in red, and one of them was Niran's. The abbot held the last unbroken mirror to the candlelight. He whispered, "It no longer wants offerings." Niran asked, "Then what does it want?" The abbot looked at the bowl and said, "A witness." Somchai had made a deal, but someone else had to watch it break, over and over, until the fire finally took, and the spirit stopped showing up to collect. As the monks gathered their last remaining tools, candles, threads, ash, Niran sat by himself in the courtyard, listening to the wind. There were no insects anymore, no birds, only the sound of water dripping from a roof that hadn't seen rain in days, and in that rhythm he heard it. Breath, underwater breath, long, slow, still waiting.
On the 12th day, they tried one final thing. They lit the fire, not the cremation fire, not for the body, but the Petit Lenkal, the ceremony of the last light, a ritual meant to guide lost spirits across the threshold between worlds, used when death clings too tightly or when a soul has wandered too far from its name. It was not meant to burn the body, only to illuminate the path. But the spirit did not want light, and the fire refused to rise. The monks gathered before dusk, 7 of them in concentric circles around the Bodhi tree. At the center, the candle, a thick taper wrapped in white cloth and scented with sandalwood and camphor. It was placed atop a clay pedestal painted in gold ink with Chin's original name, the one that Mai Duan had finally whispered the night before, Chinwat. A name spoken only once, then never again. The sky was heavy with smoke, though no one burned anything. The villagers watched from beyond the gates. No one dared come closer. Even the dogs sat in silence, as if they too understood the rules had changed. Niran stepped forward with the candle wick. The abbot knelt beside him. Together, they lit it. A flicker of gold, a single spark. The flame caught and held for exactly 7 seconds. Then it turned black and vanished. Not extinguished, swallowed. The pedestal cracked, the names smeared, and the white cloth burst into smoke. Not ash, smoke. Thick and wet, like incense soaked in rot. It poured upward and coiled in the branches of the Bodhi tree, which now bled from 3 places, each aligned with where the monks sat. One by one, the monks choked, coughed, eyes watering,
until they could no longer chant. And then a voice came, not loud, not soft, just absolute. I do not want the light. I want the promise kept. Mai Duan collapsed. Her knees gave way. She fell forward, hands gripping the edge of the courtyard stones, and began to mutter, not in Thai, not in chant, but in the language Chin had spoken in his sleep, the language of the altar. I should not be alone in the dark. He said he would carry me. He left me. He burned himself, not me. She screamed, then fainted. The abbot dragged her away. The villagers fled the fence. Only Niran stayed, frozen, watching the smoke coil into a figure, thin, small, a novice's silhouette, standing in the boughs of the tree, looking down, eyes empty, but not blind. The figure stepped forward, down the bark, not climbing, descending, as if the tree had stairs only it could see. And when it touched the ground, the bleeding stopped. So did the smoke. So did the air. So did the sky. Time paused. And Niran whispered, "What do you want from me?" The figure opened its mouth, and candlelight poured out, but it didn't warm. It chilled. The flame was not fire. It was memory, painful, hot with betrayal, and it hissed, "I came for you. I woke you for the light, and now you cannot look away." The monks could no longer chant. Their voices were gone, taken, sealed. Niran was the only one left untouched. And slowly he understood why. It wasn't that he had been spared, it was that he had been chosen, not to burn, not to chant, but to witness. He stepped forward, one pace, then another. The figure raised its hand. In its palm, a shard of mirror, the one from Niran's dream. He reached for it, took it, held it to his face, and saw himself, but not alive, his skin pale, his eyes black, and behind him, the altar, always the altar, waiting. He looked away, and the figure was gone. But the flame had returned, now small, now blue, floating at eye level. The last light, no longer for Chin, but for whoever carried the memory next. The fire had been lit, but not to cleanse, to mark. And Niran now bore the mark. He could feel it, inside his chest, behind his eyes, in the way shadows now leaned toward him, not away. The villagers said nothing when he returned. They lowered their heads, offered no garlands, no words, because they saw what he had brought back, not in his hands, not in his robes, but in his silence. That night, the candles in the temple refused to light. The oil lamps stayed dark. Even the moon, high above, remained hidden. And only the mirror in Niran's room glowed faintly from within. On the 13th day, Niran prepared himself to die. Not in defiance, not in sorrow, but in silence. The kind of silence that comes when a candle accepts the flame. He rose before the birds, washed in cold water drawn from a well that had stopped reflecting the sky, dressed not in saffron, but in white, the robe of surrender, the robe of final offerings. He wrote no letters, he left no chant. He only tied a single red string around his wrist, 7 knots, one for each failed ritual. Then he stepped barefoot onto the temple path, the gravel sharp but unresisted beneath his soles. His shadow did not follow, because it had gone ahead. The Bodhi tree waited. So did the altar, returned again as if it had never left. This time it sat at the river's edge, exposed, open, filled with dust and silence. And something else. A small black bowl, empty, hungry. Niran knelt before it. The wind shifted. The birds fled. The river, which had been still for days, began to ripple. But the ripples moved inward, toward the altar, toward the bowl, toward the monk. He began to chant, not words of release, but of invitation. The forbidden verses, never written, only passed through whispers. Verses Chinwat once spoke in sleep. Verses Somchai repeated when no one was listening. And now Niran spoke them in full voice, because someone had to open the door completely. The air tightened, the trees creaked, and then footsteps, bare, wet, soft, coming from behind. He didn't turn. He knew the shape already. A boy, a novice, Chinwat, once abandoned, now awake. Niran lowered his head and offered his breath. Take me instead. Silence. Let him burn. Silence. Let this end. The river hissed, and then laughter. Soft, childlike, but empty. The boy's voice came from the tree canopy, from the altar bowl, from the water. Everywhere at once. You still don't understand. I was never meant to be carried. I was meant to stay. The ground beneath the altar split open, not with fire, but with roots, thick, black, soaked in blood. They rose like serpents, coiling around the pedestal, curling toward Niran. He did not move. He only reached into his robe and pulled out the mirror shard, held it forward, let it reflect the altar, let it show Chinwat what he had become. A spirit not just forgotten, but twisted, warped by waiting, by promises undelivered, by offerings made wrong. The roots recoiled, the laughter stopped, the river silenced, and the boy appeared. Not shadow, not smoke, but flesh, pale, thin, face tight with fury and sorrow, eyes black from too many nights without dreaming. He stepped into the circle, reached for the mirror, but Niran held it firm. You are not a curse, he whispered. You are a wound. The boy paused, tilted his head, then screamed, not with sound, but with wind, a blast that knocked back trees, cracked bamboo, shattered nearby statues. The altar split, The bowl tumbled, the mirror fell, and did not break. Niran crawled forward, blood at his lip, breath ragged. He reached for the bowl and did what Somchai never dared. He placed his name inside it, written in red ink, folded 3 times. Then he whispered, "I carry you now, not for luck, not for life, but for rest." He struck a match, dropped it in. The bowl ignited, a quiet flame, blue, not yellow, no smoke, no ash, just light. And the boy faded, not into the wind, not into the ground, but into the bowl, into the name. The river stilled, the air warmed, the Bodhi tree stopped bleeding, and the roots returned beneath the soil. For the first time in 13 days, the village exhaled. Niran collapsed beside the altar. The abbot found him an hour later, still breathing, but changed. His eyes were gray, his voice barely a whisper. He did not speak of what he saw, only that the bowl had burned completely, and that Chin no longer waited. That night, the monks performed one last chant, a gentle one, for children, the kind recited when a novice enters the temple for the first time. But this time, it was recited for the one who never left. And as the final verse faded, a single firefly blinked above the altar stones and did not vanish.
Years passed. Bang Nong Prai remained on the map, but not in conversation. The temple gates were sealed with blessed wire. The Bodhi tree was never pruned again, and the villagers learned to dream once more. But none of them dreamed of Chin, or Somchai, or the altar, because some dreams, once burned, never come back whole. Niran remained in the temple for 3 more years. He spoke rarely, chanted daily, and never walked without a shadow again. But it wasn't the same one. This new shadow moved gently, obediently, and always stayed exactly in step, until the day Niran took his final breath beneath the Bodhi tree. No illness, no pain, just stillness and a faint scent of river water. He was cremated, without ritual, by his own request, his ashes scattered at the foot of the tree. The monks followed his final instructions to the letter. Even the villagers came to watch, but no one cried. They only bowed, because they knew what he had carried, and that it had cost him everything. After Niran, the temple was left empty. A golden stupa faded to bronze, the prayer flag shredded with time. No new monks arrived, no festivals returned. Children were told not to speak near the old altar site, especially after dark, especially if the air felt cold. Then, one year, a new family moved into the village. A man and his wife. City folk. They liked the quiet, said it was peaceful. They opened a guest house in the old rice warehouse, painted over the prayer symbols, built a wooden platform above the river for fishing. They never asked why the neighbors stayed silent after sunset, or why the children never played near the east fence, or why, on certain nights, the candles in their home would not light. One evening, after a storm, the couple explored the far edge of the village. They followed a winding path of stone, half lost to moss. It led to an overgrown courtyard where vines had swallowed most of a gate. Behind it was the temple, crumbling, silent, but still standing. They didn't go in, not yet, but they peered through the gaps in the wood, saw statues wrapped in tattered orange robes, a bell that swayed though no wind blew, and a courtyard overgrown with weeds that smelled like old jasmine. In the center sat a low stone altar, nothing on it, just dust and a single clay bowl, empty, waiting. That night they returned home, mentioned the temple to a neighbor. She only smiled and said nothing. But at 3:13 a.m., the man woke up. Not to noise, not to light, but to the smell of burnt string. He walked to the window, looked toward the trees, and saw a candle burning on the old altar. Faint, blue, unmoving. He woke his wife, but when she came to look, the candle was gone. The wind had died, but the silence remained. And on their doorstep was an offering tray, upside down, with a single folded name tucked beneath it. Not theirs, not anyone's, just witness. And far in the distance, beneath the temple's collapsed roof, something stirred once more. Not out of anger, not out of pain, but out of memory. Because even when the fire has burned, and the chants have ended, and the bowl has cracked, some spirits still wait, not for release, but for the offering that was never made.